day. They ain't holding no chain.
Gordon's got back country, and we get busy. Bars and umbrella sunbox, Everest 19.
Four cars side by side in a wild thrill ride with the roar of the engines leaving all doubts behind. As the wheels spin on, chasing dreams we can't hide. That's car life where legends never die.
Welcome everybody to the Four Wide Podcast once again this week. We are the lone soldier tonight. Everybody else is doing their good old Christmas stuff and parties and whatnot. So I'm still here though, and I'm still going to produce this episode. So the only voice that you'll hear today is probably mine, unless someone comes out of the shadow realm. I haven't heard anything from anybody, so I imagine everybody's pretty busy. Hope you guys are doing well. Obviously, it's a pretty eventful weeks. We tragically lost one of the most prestigious, honestly, just race car drivers here. It's kind of transitioned not only from what he did on the track, but also what he did during the horrific events of Hurricane Helene and all other terrible things that happened around the world. He would give aid, and of course now he had ties in with Cletus. This one thing that I wish the other guys were here just to talk about, because I could talk about this Atlanta race by myself, no problem, but to really get a really good perspective on not just one side of the story with Mr. Biffle, the Biff, obviously was a Hall of Fame candidate. 19 career wins, I believe, in the Cup Series. Finished second in the championship in 2005, right behind Tony Stewart. We were just talking about that last week here on the podcast. And then, if you guys have not heard, there was a tragic plane crash that not only was he in that plane, but also his entire family and a couple other NASCAR personalities. Our thoughts and prayers of all the members of the Four Wide podcast go out to them. And I think in next week, I'll just go ahead and say this straight up. We're going to talk about the Dover win that Greg Biffle had. A really good ending between him and I believe Matt Kenseth and Carl Edwards, but I think that's what we're going to look at. Obviously, he's won the Southern 500 and other big races. Also, on top of that, historical career, obviously had the truck record of wins in a season, and that got broke this year by Corey Heim. So you got to see his legend beat, which it must have been pretty cool to have all the hype around his record and everybody recollecting and thinking about that amazing year. That actually today would have been his birthday, December 23rd, 1969. That's when he was born. I believe he was supposed to be 56. One thing that I think about when I think of Greg Biffle, if we just talk about the straight up, just the race car driver, never was a driver that I would say had the most extreme personality on the track. He was probably the most, I would say, normal person on the grid. It felt like him and Matt Kenseth both kind of flew under the radar. One thing I think of is him driving that 16 car for so many years at Roush. It's very rare in any sport that a player for the same team for pretty much his whole career. I think of people like Chipper Jones for the Braves, whole entire career with the Braves. And now we have Greg Biffle, who spent majority of his years at Roush. He would transcend the boundaries of not just NASCAR and racing, but just overall racing personality. So I hope that we have more people like him in the sport of NASCAR. I hope that his legacy, what he established, not only during his career, but after his career, people were able to pick up that torch and continue that to show that even after, you're done racing, you can still be within the racing world. Just think about the year hadn't drove a truck in so many years, and he won that one start in that Kyle Busch Motorsports 51 truck in Texas. 29, he comes into Texas and wins that race. Just overall wheelman, great guy, and the sport will surely miss him. And I have a couple friends that are close to his family and have been devastated the entire week. So just like I said, we're going to do an episode talking about his win at Dover as the retro recap for next week. And I think it'll be a good tribute for what we can do during the off season for him. So I plan on doing that. And yeah, we're going to look forward to doing that. But first, we have to recap the race that Kent wanted us to talk about, which was the 2011 Advocare 500. This race is kind of interesting in a lot of different ways. There's a lot of nuances and things that I really noticed throughout the race. This race was incredibly crazy to sit down and try to watch because there's so much different spacing. Because obviously, during when this race was supposed to be scheduled, Tropical Storm Lee was coming through, and NASCAR moved that start time 20 minutes earlier, but the race wasn't able to be held and eventually had to be rescheduled on September 6, 2011, which ironically was the first time that NASCAR has raced on a Tuesday since 2007. Obviously, attendance would be down for that race, but there was one individual that I know that was at that race, and that was our Kent, Mr. Kent, that's not on the podcast tonight. But I remember him telling us stories about how the race kept getting delayed. He's like wanting to go to the race because he went the previous days and it had the rain out and the tropical storm, all that washout. And he's at school, disappointed the race is going to go on. Then he hears over the intercom that, hey, Kent, your dad's here to pick you up. And he comes out all excited. He gets in the truck and his dad's got all his Jeff Gordon gear and whatnot. I'm pretty sure this is the race that he was talking about. If not, he can correct me the next time he's on. But he was in attendance for this race, which ironically would be the race that he got to see his idol Jeff Gordon win, which was a pretty prestigious win in Jeff Gordon's career as well. It was his 85th Cup Series win, and that was the most wins in the modern era at that portion of time, surpassing Darrell Waltrip, and would put him at the pedestal of being the third best driver all time on the wins list, ahead of Waltrip and Bobby Allison. A lot of history, a lot of crazy stuff going on with this event. But when this race started, it was not, a domination fest by Jeff Gordon. This is not one that you sat down and you're like, okay, we're going to sit here and be bored by the same guy leading the whole entire time. The guy that was on the pole initially was Casey Kane, and that would be for that Red Bull Racing team in that 4-car, who was very strong early in that race. That paint scheme also slick, but also another driver that also had Red Bull on his car, who also had a very slick paint scheme, would be the Brian Vickers machine and that metallic silvery chrome. Beautiful paint scheme. It's probably my favorite out of the two. Ironically, I know most people are really gung-ho about the classic Casey Kane 4 Red Bull, but that Brian Vickers car always stood out to me a lot of the times. Really, Brian Vickers, his whole entire career, every paint scheme that he had for majority of it was pretty iconic. I mean, he was part of the Eras machine, the team there. Great iconic paint schemes, but I really think of that Red Bull paint scheme a lot of times. So this is kind of an interesting part also because Atlanta, I believe this year is when they transition from 2 races to 1 race. This would be the only race that Atlanta would hold this year. Atlanta's attendance was slowly dwindling. People were not necessarily the most favorable towards the racing there. That was very much of a track where it would just shred your tires like the way the old pavement used to be. And now Atlanta's one of the most exciting events on the NASCAR schedule. People would say it's the best plate track on the schedule for these next-gen cars. But this race was one that held my attention pretty much throughout the whole entire race. There was a lot of different storylines going on. Obviously, I think Jeff Gordon ended up leading about 146 laps of this race. It wasn't crazy domination fest by him. There's 325 laps in the race. Casey Kane obviously would have led a good portion of those, but also Kyle Busch, prime Kyle Busch, comes out in that pedigree car and starts putting some really good laps together. And then you had old JJ. JJ shows up and he's doing his thing. Obviously, this year would be a year that he was doing really well in the points. I believe coming out of this race, he would be on top of the point standings. But it was kind of an interesting environment because this race was in the fall of Atlanta, but it was still around 95 degrees with partly cloudy. A little bit of wind, of course, all the mist and whatnot. And anybody that sat down and watched the race would, there was a lot going on in between the start and the conclusion of this race. There were 4 drivers that did not make this race. Tony Raines would be one of them. David Stream, Jeffrey Bodine, and TJ Bell would be the 4 that did not qualify. The last one to qualify in on speed would be David Starr in the 95 machine. But there was a lot of things that it's hard to track everything that was going on with this race. But that's what made it interesting. A lot of these races, especially in the 2010s and early 2000s, were not the most thrilling races to sit down and watch because you would see a domination fest. Someone would lead a majority of the laps. Good old tail whooping is what they used to call it. But you really don't have that much anymore. It is a very rare thing. I think of William Byron dominating Charlotte this year, won all 3 stages, looked like he was going to be the shoe-in to win. And then the guy from the very back in a backup car comes up and ends up winning the race. You just don't see many people put, the stamp at the start and the stamp at the end anymore when it comes to races. So that's why when we talk about people like SVG, as much as people want to discredit his talents on the NASCAR circuit, it takes a lot of things to go from point A to point B flawlessly. I mean, just look at Chicago the one year that he didn't win when he was driving that Collie car, the Spicy Nugs car, beautiful car paint scheme, but just barely get hit by Kyle Larson by sliding in the rain, ended his race. That's all it takes. So when everything lines up like it has for him on the road courses, for the exception of COTA this year, I mean, you just got to appreciate it as much as you might want to be, well, that's the only race that he's really good at. And then you start looking at the statistics and you start to see that that's not necessarily true when it comes to the end of the year. I digress, though. I don't want to get too much on a tangent, but just for a little bit of a similarity there for the 2011 Advocare 500 is there was not a driver throughout the race that looked like he was going to dominate the race and win it. You've seen glimpses, but pretty much everybody. I mean, I think of Denny Hamlin showing up. He looked like he was a strong contender. Brian Vickers looked like he was going to pass for the lead and ends up hitting the wall. And that pretty much destroys his chance at winning that race. Great storylines when it comes to this race. But then you have the iconic finish of Mr. not 7-time at that time, though, a champion, Jimmy Johnson, and Jeff Gordon, 2 Hendrick teammates, 2 iconic paint schemes. That 24, I think at this time he was driving the AARP, like chromish looking car. Even though that's not like the iconic DuPont Flames, still for someone that was really into NASCAR during that time, that's a very iconic paint scheme for them. And then you have Jimmy Johnson in that standardized Lowe's paint scheme, iconic car, just fantastic career for both of these guys and teammates, and they're battling at the end of this race. And you see Jimmy Johnson closing the gap, 4 laps to go. Then he gets into the corner too hard, and Jeff Gordon gets a little bit of lead, and then he reels him back in. Then they both get loose. They're driving their cars as hard as possible. It's obvious that these cars were not handling good at the end of the race. These tires that they were running were starting to give up. And there was no quit in either of these drivers. And all it took was either one driver to get side by side with somebody else, slip up, wreck each other, then the person that was sitting there in third, prime condition. But these 2 Hall of Famers gripping the wheels tight, going hard as they can on one of the oldest, roughest, crudest surfaces on the circuit at that time. Just a fantastic finish. And I know we talked last week, the Brickyard had a really good finish between Tony Stewart and Casey Kane, and that's kind of why that race is kind of infamous, having the iconic moment when Tony Stewart comes out and he's climbing the fence and everything. But with this race, it wasn't necessarily the most craziest celebration by any means, but it was a great iconic milestone for one of NASCAR's most prestigious drivers. I mean, I don't care if you didn't like him or you did. Jeff Gordon is definitely one of those drivers that you sit there and like, hey, he's a legend. At the end of the day, you look at the sheet and see how many wins that he had in his career, how many high class performances he had, especially towards the twilight years of his career. He was still getting it done, kind of similar to like a Kevin Harvick. Kevin Harvick, towards the end of his career, was still showing really great progression and still that want to drive. Now you compare it to someone like a Kyle Busch the last few years that we've seen struggle, and you're like, where's the good old Rowdy, right? I think one of the most important parts about this race was the ability of those cars to drive side by side. There was numerous times Jeff Gordon won this race, but he would be stuck third, fourth groove in a 5 wide or a 4 wide going in certain corners, and you just see that car just act like it was a terrible car. You have one of the best cars on the circuit, Carl Edwards, the 99 machine, had one of the best long race pace cars, but when it come to a restart, he would struggle so hard. Then you have people like Clint Boyer coming up in that 33 and fighting for the lead. It was immensely entertaining to me. Greg Biffle, he didn't have the best race this race. He was around in the 30s for a large portion of this race. Look at top 10, 200 guys. Tony Stewart ended up finishing third, and that would be in that 14 machine. Kurt Busch in the 22, back when he was still raced for Penske. Carl Edwards in the 99. Brad Kay in the Penske. Kevin Harvick in the 29, still for Richard Childress Racing. AJ Allmendinger, still with Richard Petty Motorsports. Ryan Vickers just outside the top 10 in that 83 machine. Greg Biffle ended up finishing 12th. Insane compared to where he was earlier in the race. But then if you're someone like me, who was, a Dale Earnhardt Jr. fan, he ended up finishing 19th this race, and he was in the back for a large portion of this race too. It was not a fun race to be a Dale Jr. fan. But then you have someone like Clint Boyer, who looked he was going to be one of the strongest cars throughout the race, and he was for a large portion, but he ended up not finishing all those laps. Had a couple of engine failures, like a David Reagan and a couple others that were, you don't see those much anymore. We've seen a couple this year, which was surprising, but most of them were at like high stress tracks, which kind of correlates because Atlanta's one of those tracks where you're going to be forcing your car over the limits, over driving it, trying to get the most out of it. I feel like old school Atlanta was definitely a racer's racetrack. Your real racers really decided, they're going to grit down, they're going to fight, and they usually came out on top. Where now Atlanta, being a drafting track, you still have a little bit of that, but where it's drafting, it kind of negates a lot of that. And now you have people who are competing that for stage wins that are not necessarily upper tier quality drivers, in my opinion, which is fine. That's just the way that the racing is going to be at a restrictor plate. That's how it always has been in these newer generations of cars. So overall, though, just sitting back and recollecting everything that was going on with this race, it was a lot. There's a lot of breaks, so you had a little bit of time to walk around, really relax. And when this race was able to officially get started, I think the drivers were ready to go, and it really showed they were ready to put everything on the line, really do. And this would be, of course, on ESPN also, something that you don't obviously see now. ESPN's really not involved in NASCAR much at all. I don't watch Sports Center anymore. I used to, and I was in middle school, want to keep up to date with every other sport. But I would imagine that NASCAR, unless it's talking about the championship race, the highlights have got to be kind of minuscule. Even when you're listening to the media people after the race, there's not a lot of ESPNs in those post press conference asking questions. They're probably more just getting the quotes from other people. But obviously, the announcers for this race will be like an Alan Bestwick, Dale Jarrett, and Andy Petrie. Three amazing minds when it comes to the NASCAR world. And they did a really good job of articulating and describing this race and really dissecting everything that was going on, from the leaders to even people that were struggling, like Dale Earnhardt Jr. or somebody in the back, and their steady progress forward, or the drivers that looked like they were going to be strong right off the gate and fell back, and what led to that failure, which I feel like NASCAR could do a better job at. They didn't do too terrible a job compared to the previous years this year. If they could pay attention to storylines more of the race and focus a little bit less on playoff this, playoff that, it would be an absolute elite change for NASCAR. That is all I have for this Advocare 500, my general thoughts. I can't sit here and yap too long about it because I only have a certain amount of opinions and thoughts about the race, and I think that it was a good choice. I enjoyed it much more than the Brickyard race last week. I felt like there was a lot more going on, but I think that next week it'd be a good way to honor the Biff in the best way that we can. Have the boys come in and we'll talk about, obviously, their reaction to the news and stuff, and then we will dissect the race and kind of talk about it and talk about why we think that it's not just a great race for him. Obviously, it'd be a good tribute, but it was one of the better finishes that I remember at Dover, especially during those years. Yep. That's all I have, guys. Of course, thank you to Wilkerson's Catering for sponsoring our podcast, partnering with us every single week. We really appreciate Kyle and his family. I know they're really still busy with the catering. They still not let their foot hit off the gas yet. They're still accelerating. I'm sure they're going to be enjoying this week just as everybody should be. Go see your families, your loved ones, your friends, hold them tight, share great memories and everything that's accompanied with that. And it's I know that he's going to be super busy for 2026. I know they're already probably close to getting through all their January and February dates. But if you guys have any weddings or any events that are happening in the North Carolina area, make sure to check out them at Wilkerson's Catering. That's on Facebook. You can find him on Instagram on a personal, but best way to contact Kyle is to click the link in our description, and that will take you to his website. You fill out a 1 to 2 minute form just saying what you need, your event date, and kind of just want to ask an inquiry. And from my experience, they will get back super duper quick. Obviously, being Christmas, give them a little bit of leniency, but just in general, on a normal work week, Kyle's always on it. Just make sure to always support those local businesses, as they will always support you guys back. I think that's one thing that we always need to think about with hurricanes and tragic events. Is the first few people are those family oriented businesses and people that wanted to facilitate and provide aid where they could. Also, shout out to Glowing Glove. Obviously, that's more the RDU area, but if you guys need your house to look brand spanking new, have a little bit of shiny windows. If your house is white, pure white like snow, just accompanies it all, make sure to check out Glowing Glove. I will always include their wonderful websites and information below, so you can always reach out to them. One last thing, if you guys could just leave a thumbs up, a comment on the video. If you want to subscribe, that'd be fantastic, because we're doing race recaps just like this every week. And if you guys have not caught the previous other ones, make sure to check them out. I'll tell you what, I'll even make it a playlist of just the retro race recaps. If you want them, we will provide them. So thank you guys for showing up and supporting here the last little bit on these retro race recaps. They've been really fun to make, kind of a nostalgic walk down memory lane, and just enjoy NASCAR during the off season when possible. I hope you guys have a wonderful Christmas. Y'all take care. God bless.